The U.S. Capitol protests have sparked local protests across the United States. Demonstrators have gathered in California, Michigan, Utah, Colorado, and Arizona. Joining me now is social activist and Black Issues Forum analyst Kerwin Pittman. Thank you for being here with us today, Kerwin. And the first thing I wanted to really pick your brain on is the contrast between some of the protests and demonstrations that you've been a part of over the last year and even before that, when you look at what we saw happen in Washington.
Yes, thank you for having me. So the contrast in particular, the protests that I've been a part of, we're actually fighting for a cause, a social justice change within the current climate, not only of police brutality, but just a whole host of different social justice injustices. And so what we've been seeing in polar contrast and polar opposite with these, particularly these Stop the Steal pro-Trump supporter rallies, is individuals moving, in my opinion, without a purpose or a cause and an end game. To think that you could stop the process, the democratic process of certifying the votes, the electoral college votes of the next president is absurd.
So, and you mentioned kind of moving with a focus. As you move forward and continue to kind of organize and rally towards some of the goals you've been pushing for, do you foresee what transpired maybe having an impact on how law enforcement handles or addresses protests in our own area?
I hope what we have seen has an impact on how local law enforcement kind of police the protesters, so to speak. And I hate to use that terminology, but that is what it is. What we've seen these past few days, especially in the Capitol, is extreme restraint and discipline from law enforcement. So from now on, it shouldn't be no reason as to why that Black Lives Matter protesters shouldn't receive the same amount of restraint and subduedness when it comes to particularly using brute force against individuals that's actually out there protesting for injustices.
And you mentioned the way we've seen different protests handled. How do you what are some of your ideas or some of the things you've been working on to make sure that leaders are held accountable when things do potentially get out of hand and ensure that things like that don't happen again in the future?
So some of the things we'll be doing is highlighting the different events that are taking place and where actions went wrong on both parties, but particularly those who are trained to do these type of jobs. First, we must know and understand that individuals who are protesting are exercising their constitutional right, and they're not trained professionals. So anybody on the other side of law enforcement, are trained professionals and should act as such. And we seen that restraint happen the other day, and so we will be looking forward for this restraint to happen. So pointing it out is the first step, and then sitting down at the table with different key players to come up with strategies ahead of the time to say, look, this is what we expect to happen, and if this happened, we expect this amount of restraint from law enforcement.
And when you've been involved in different protests in the past, have you ever had an experience where things were on the brink or the verge of getting out of hand and you've had to quell that? And if so, what were some of the things you did or techniques you used maybe to keep things in check and keep them focused on what the goal was?
So being out and organizing numerous protests, it's been a lot of instances to where things was about to spill over hand. And so we got to always recenter the crowd and kind of call back to the attention of what is the purpose that we're out here. And so to not diminish or take attention away from the real purpose that we're out here by something absurd happening. And so that's one of the ways that you can kind of call back and hone back in and bring everybody's attention back to the reason at hand. We're out here to fight against injustices, and we're out here to let our voices be heard that we do not like for these injustices to occur, particularly to us. And so we do not want to give anybody a reason to justify them doing this type of brute force and brutality against us. So yeah, it's been plenty of instances in where I kind of had to bring it back in, and instances into where I had to negotiate the arrest, essentially, or so individuals will not be arrested. I remember one particular time it was about to be 100 people or so arrested for blocking traffic, and the individuals wanted to just leave, but law enforcement had trapped these individuals on the highway specifically. So I had to go speak with those in higher position that was out there and say, listen, these individuals are trying to leave. We're trying to leave peacefully, and if you allow us to leave peacefully without any arrest, we will leave right now, and that was granted.
Well, hopefully we can see some of those changes in 2021 and moving forward. Kerwin, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.